Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi over here at rotocurve.com. I go by BRich11 on all the daily fantasy sites, and I'm here with our next installment of our Quick Hits episode. And what we're going to do here is tell you guys a little bit about some of the hitters that we were looking at for today's slate. Today is Tuesday, June 30th. There's a lot of big contests going on in DFS, so let's get into some of the pitchers we want to target and some of the bats that we're going to be using against them. For starters, we got Danny Duffy for Kansas City going up against the Houston Astros. Duffy's a guy who's allowed a 305 batting average with 4 home runs and 32 innings to right-handed batters so far this year. There's a lot of right-handed bats at the top of that Houston Astros order that are going to be in play today. Top of that list is Jose Altuve. Altuve's hitting 333 this year against left-handed pitching. Last year, he actually hit 414 against left-handed pitching, so he's actually doing a little bit worse. But you really can't argue when you're getting a guy in a matchup who's hitting 333 against lefties. His teammate, Carlos Correa, fills in a real tough-to-fill shortstop position for you today. He's hitting 310 so far with 3 home runs in 42 at-bats against left-handed pitching. So Correa is a guy that has a little bit of pop and has a high average, so he's pretty much safe for you to use in your cash games, and also a guy that has the upside for tournaments. He's my top shortstop option on the day, and definitely somebody I think you should be considering. The last guy is actually at a discounted price all over the industry, and that's the leadoff batter for Houston, George Springer. Springer only has a 277 average, but he has 6 home runs and 96 at-bats against left-handed pitching so far. If you remember, Springer started off ice cold this season, and basically after they moved him up into the leadoff spot, he's been hitting at for a much higher average. So with those 3 guys, you got guys that are hitting above 300 with a little bit of home run pop, taking on a pitcher who's been giving up a 300 average to right-handed batters and a couple home runs. So it's definitely a good matchup for those Houston bats. It's a group that you might want to consider stacking, and those are 3 guys that whether you stack or not, I think you should look to try to get into your lineups today. The next pitcher I want to talk about is another one that's going to be a popular stack, and that's Eduardo Rodriguez from the Boston Red Sox. Now, Rodriguez had been really, really good in his first couple starts. He is really tough on right-handed bats. He's only allowing a 220 batting average, but this Toronto offense is one of the best in the league. They do have the most runs scored so far, and basically they have a whole bunch of right-handed bats that can mash against left-handed pitching. It's definitely not an easy spot for a guy like Eduardo Rodriguez who's struggling, but, you know, again, if you're looking up there in the Rogers Center, Toronto against left-handed bats is something that we against left-handed pitchers is something that we always look to target. So you're going to look at guys like Reyes is obviously going to be in play. Josh Donaldson is probably my favorite target from this game and my favorite third baseman on the day. Donaldson has been absolutely mashing left-handed pitching so far this season. He's also a guy that has a couple home runs. The last couple times they faced a lefty, he's gone and homered in the first inning off of that left-handed pitcher, especially when they're up in the Rogers Center. So Donaldson is definitely somebody I think should be on your radar. He's definitely not cheap today. He's not going to be easy to fit in those lineups, but he's definitely somebody who I think would be a great cash game target. And with the home run power and potential that he has, he has that tournament upside for you. Other guys like Joey Bautista, Edwin Encarnacion, even maybe a Danny Valencia, if you can find him cheap. You know, these are all guys who mash left-handed pitching. They're all guys that are going to be up high in the order, and they're all guys who you should be considering today. Whether they go with Russ Martin or Diana Navarro, both of those guys can hit left-handed pitching pretty well. My guess is it's going to be Martin, but, you know, either way, I'm not going to argue with it. One of those 2 guys should be in the 5 or 6 hole today for Toronto, and they're going to be in a pretty good spot as well. Even a guy like Chris Colabello, basically anybody on this Toronto team could be in play. I think that this is going to be one of those games that you can fade in the tournament, though, because there's going to be a lot of people who go ahead and stack up those Toronto bats. So if you're trying to do something in a low-owned way to get you off of what everybody else is doing for a tournament, I definitely think it's a good thing to try to fade Toronto today. They are in one of the best matchups. They do have one of the higher totals, and they are in a great hitter's park. But again, I mean, we've already seen Rodriguez be pretty good. Even though he struggled lately, you know, there is a chance that he could come out and pitch a good game today. And for a tournament, I definitely think there is merit in going away from Toronto. Although for cash games, you want to try to include some of these Toronto bats because they are in the best spot and they are probably one of the more likely teams to get a bunch of runs today. Next guy I want to talk about is Colby Lewis. Colby Lewis had a 278 batting average with 5 home runs and 57 innings pitched so far this year to left-handed bats, which is not horrible, although the average is a little high. Last year, though, he allowed left-handed bats to hit 320 off him with 10 home runs and 92 innings. So if you're going to attack a guy like Colby Lewis, you really want to do it using left-handed bats. The two left-handed bats on that Baltimore team, if you look at that over-under today, it's pretty high. That's one of the reasons why at first glance I wasn't really on a ton of the Baltimore bats, but then I had to go back and kind of see who you could fit in the lineup and who made some sense to use. The two guys on Baltimore that I think you can put in play are Matt Wieters at catcher. He had the day off yesterday, so it's very likely he's going to be in the lineup today. This year, he's hitting .342 with 2 home runs already and 38 at-bats against right-handed pitching. Last year, he had .325 with 3 home runs and 83 at-bats. So he hits right-handed pitching very well, and Colby Lewis is a guy who struggles a little bit with lefties. So Wieters being a switch hitter, probably batting from the left side against Lewis, I think he's a guy that you can use today in a tough-to-fill catcher position. The other guy who I think you can use in your lineups at second base or third base, which gives you a little bit of flexibility, is Jimmy Paredes. When they go up against the righty, Paredes is a switch hitter as well, but he hits much better from the left side. So when they go up against righties, he usually finds himself batting in the 2-hole for that Orioles team. He has a .332 average against right-handed pitching so far with 9 home runs and 187 at-bats. His price is pretty cheap all over the industry. It's come down from the high that he was. He's still not one of the cheaper options. It's definitely not a punt play. It's somebody that you're going to have to pay up a little bit for. But I definitely think in this matchup that Paredes is going to be worth the money. There are other left-handed bats in that lineup, guy like Chris Davis, who you can look at as well. I basically don't think Davis is in for a great game today. Colby Lewis is somebody who doesn't give up a ton of home runs, but he does give up a lot of hits. So I think you want to look at the guys with the higher averages than Davis, you know, guys like a Paredes or Wieters, who I think make more sense in this spot. A couple other guys I wanted to mention. Carlos Frias going up against Arizona. Frias has been horrible against left-handed bats. He's giving up a .371 batting average this year on the heels of a .317 batting average to left-handed bats last year. So if you look at that Arizona order, obviously I think Goldie is always the guy who's in play. If you have the money to pay up for him, he's going to be low owned because a lot of people aren't paying up for him lately. And, you know, he showed you last night what he can do in that last at-bat in the 7th inning. He hit a single that scored 2 runs, picked up some points for you there. Then he stole a base and wound up coming around and scoring a run. So even though he didn't hit a home run in that one at-bat, he wound up picking up, you know, if you're playing on DraftKings, he got you 3 points for the single. He got you 4 points for the 2 RBIs. He got you 5 points for the stolen base and another 2 points for the run scored. So he wound up getting you the same 14 points you would get from a solo home run. And that's the thing that makes Goldschmidt such a great player. He can get you, especially in fantasy, he can get you stolen bases. He can get you home runs. He drives in runs. He scores runs, and he hits for a high average. Plus, guys are afraid to pitch to him, so he also walks and gets on base, which gives him a chance to steal more bases and score more runs. There's just so many ways that this guy can rack up points, so he's always somebody that's in play if you can afford him. The two left-handed bats, though, that fit the best against Frias are Jake Lamb and David Peralta. Peralta's been batting in the 2-hole lately. His price has come down a little bit in spots. If you can find him, he's going to be a good option for you. He's hitting .280 so far this year against right-handed pitching, and as we said, Frias is a guy who's allowing a .370 average to lefties. The other left-handed bat you might want to look at is Jake Lamb. Lamb started the season hitting over .300 against right-handed pitching, and then he got hurt, and when he came back, he was in a little bit of a slump. He hit a home run the other day. He's had a couple double-digit scores on DraftKings lately, so he's starting to round himself back into shape. If you can get a guy like Jake Lamb pretty cheap, he's not that cheap over on DraftKings. I think he's $3,800. I didn't look at his price today on FanDuel, but if you can find a guy like that for a cheap price on whatever site you're paying, he's definitely somebody that's worth taking a flyer on. Lamb does have some power. He does hit for a decent average. He's .280 so far this year against right-handed pitching. So it's definitely not a bad matchup in a good hitter's park against a pitcher who really struggles with left-handed bats. Next guy I want to mention is on the opposite side of that game, and that's Rubby De La Rosa. I definitely think that some of these LA lefties are going to be in play today. De La Rosa this year is allowing a .299 batting average with a 1.56 whip and 10 home runs in 44 innings to left-handed bats. Last year, he allowed left-handed batters to hit .305 against them, but he did only give up 4 home runs in 53 innings, so there wasn't as many home runs last year for him. Basically, when you're looking at that Dodgers order, there's a lot of left-handed bats that you can take advantage of a guy like De La Rosa with. You can start on top with a guy like Jock Peterson. Peterson is definitely feast or famine. He basically hits a home run or strikes out. He's got a batting average around .250 against basically against all handedness of pitchers. But he does have 20 home runs already this year. So if you're looking for upside in the tournament, a guy like Peterson definitely makes sense. He homered last night in a similar spot. So he's swinging the bat well. He's seeing the ball well. And he could be that guy that gets you that big, that big home run that pushes you up in the tournament. I know on DraftKings he's only 4,300, so if he does go yard, he's going to pay off his salary. But again, he's also a guy that could go 0 for 3 with 3 strikeouts for you. So just keep that in mind. He's definitely more of a tournament play than a cash game play. A guy who's more of a cash game play, but I do think has tournament upside today, is Adrian Gonzalez. Again, he's a left-handed masher going up. He's a right-handed masher going up against a guy who really struggles against left-handed bats. My biggest problem with Gonzalez is his prices got jacked up all over. He's almost $5,000 today over on DraftKings. And for a couple $100 more, you can go up and get a guy like Goldie, or you can get somebody else who might have a little bit more of a power stroke. Gonzalez is a great average hitter. He did have a lot of home runs earlier in the year, but he's more of a guy who's going to hit 320 than a guy who's going to hit 50 home runs. So at first base, I usually like to look for home runs. There's going to be guys with home run potential. As we discussed already, Edwin Encarnacion is in a good spot. There's at least half a dozen first basemen who you can expect a home run out of today, or at least think are in a good spot to get you a home run today. And if you take a guy like Gonzalez and he goes 2 for 3 with a walk, a single, a double, and maybe 1 or 2 RBIs, he's basically going to fall short of getting you the 14 points that one of these guys that goes 1 for 4 with a home run can get you. So while I do like Gonzalez today, I think he's more of a cash game play as opposed to Peterson, his teammate, who's more of a tournament play. Which again, you guys will realize now it's all about the matchup. So it doesn't matter that these two guys are on the same team. One of them could be a cash game play. One of them can be a tournament play based on the results that they usually wind up giving you. Yasmani Grandal, also somebody who could be in play as a catcher. He had a home run yesterday, a pretty big game. He hits very well against right-handed pitching, and especially as a left-handed bat against a guy who struggles with lefties. He could be somebody that you look at. There are a couple other catcher options that I like more, both above and below him price-wise. But again, for a tournament, he's definitely somebody who's in play. Moving on from there, you got the Los Angeles Angels are starting Andrew Heaney tomorrow. Against right-handed batters, he's allowed a 309 batting average with 6 home runs in 20 innings pitched. And he's also given up 16 earned runs over that time. So right-handed bats are really knocking him around a little bit. That basically, when you look at the Yankees order, though, they do have a couple switch hitters there. But the one guy who really stands out is Chris Young. Now, Chris Young did not have a good game yesterday. I think he had zero DraftKings points. If you're playing on FanDuel, I think he actually wound up with a negative number for you. But this is the guy with the highest WOBA in the league against left-handed pitching. So he's still cheap basically all over. On DraftKings, I think you only pay $3,400 for him. I think he's below 3,000, like maybe 24 or 26 over on FanDuel. Even over on a site like Fantasy Aces, he's $3,900. So this guy is the cheap guy that you can put into your lineups today in order to fit in a stud pitcher like a Chris Sale and still get some of the big bats like a Donaldson that you might want to go after today. The next guy I want to talk about is Justin Verlander. Now, Verlander is a guy who bats against him tend to go under-owned because people who are the casual fans don't realize that this guy is not the same guy that won a couple Cy Young awards back in the day. Basically, he's made 2 starts already this year. Neither one of them has got him to double-digit fantasy points, and he's basically gotten knocked around a little bit in both of those starts. So if you look at that Pirates roster that's going to be going up against them today, 2 guys that hit right-handed pitching pretty well are Francisco Cervelli and Andrew McCutchen. Cervelli's batting average is up around 300 right now against right-handed pitching, so he's definitely somebody who's going to be in play. He'll probably be hitting 6th or 7th in that order, and he's one of the cheaper options at catcher today that you might want to consider. There is one other guy that we'll talk about in a minute who I like a little bit better, but he's probably my number 2 cheap option catcher if you're rolling out, if you're rolling out multiple lineups in the tournament today. Now, McCutchen, on the other hand, has more home run upside. Verlander is a guy who has been giving up definitely more home runs than he did when he was, winning his Cy Young awards a couple years ago. He still has that good fastball, though, and if you get around on a good fastball, it's going to go a long way. Andrew McCutchen's a guy that's hitting about 290 against right-handed pitching, and he had a sluggish start to the season and has been coming on very strong since. He has 8 home runs and 212 at-bats so far this year against right-handed pitching. So we know that this guy has power. We know that he can hit for average, and he's going to be in the middle of that Pirates order, so he's going to have a chance to drive in some runs. His price is a little expensive today at $4,700, but I think that's only going to help keep his ownership levels down. So if you're going to spend up today, there's not a lot of guys with great matchups up top that I really like. I definitely think McCutchen is one of those guys that you can look at. The last guy I want to mention is going up against Jorge De La Rosa, the other De La Rosa today, and that's Josh Flegley. He's the catcher for the Oakland A's. This guy has been very, very good so far this year against left-handed pitching. He has a 362 batting average and 3 home runs and 47 at-bats. The last game that they played against a left-hander, he was slotted into that 5 hole in the batting order, and he wound up hitting a home run. I think there was a couple guys on too. So he had a big fantasy return for a really small price. He's pretty much cheap all over the place today, and he's a guy that you should be looking at with high upside at the catcher position, who can help you fit in a Chris Sale if you want to use him as a pitcher, or who can help get you some of the big bats that you might want to use throughout the day as well. So that's just a little breakdown today of some of the guys who we have in that column of guys that we want to target against. And of those guys that we want to target against, these are some of the bats that we think are in the best position to do something. As always, wait till lineups come out later. See if you can find a cheap guy or two who's getting better lineup placement, or somebody in a matchup that we might have overlooked today. Try to give yourself a little differentiation if you're playing in your tournaments. And if you're playing in a cash game, these guys that we mentioned are the guys that are in the best spots. So try to put the best combination of these guys and your favorites together, and you should have a winning lineup today to help you move on in a Survivor tournament on DraftKings, or to help you win those head-to-heads and 50-50s on DraftKings and FanDuels and Fantasy Aces. So as always, that's another episode of our quick hit section for you guys today. Hope you enjoyed it, and stay classy, DFS.